Chapter 246. Samuel Daly took a few deep breaths to reduce the pain in his body. After a while, he looked at Kevin Kyle again. He stared at Kevin Kyle's calm face for a long time. Kevin Kyle's was too strong. So strong that he did not show any emotions on his face. Samuel Daly surreptitiously studied Kevin Kyle for a long time. The only person who could make Kevin Kyle's face reveal any emotion was Karen Daly. She was Kevin Kyle's only weakness. Samuel Daly held Kevin Kyle's soft spot tightly in his hand. He would not be satisfied if he did not make use of his weakness. After a long while, Samuel Daly said, "As for that secret, it doesn't matter to me whether I say it or not. But after you know it, it will be dangerous for others to know. Then, old Master Kyle will try his best to protect the person he wants to protect for so many years. And I'm afraid that he can't keep it that way any longer," Kevin Kyle said in a deep voice. "Nick Black." Once again, when he heard Kevin Kyle calling for him, Nick Black, who had been guarding behind Kevin Kyle, immediately stepped forward, rubbing his hands together. His intentions were obvious. Don't. Samuel Daly raised his hand and surrendered. "I really can't tell you this secret. If you really want to know, you should ask your own grandfather. Maybe you should ask Neil Brown, who is now in charge of the military in Chatterton Town. The answer they give you must be much more detailed than what I can say." Kevin Kyle didn't expect to hear the name Neil Brown at this time. After a slight pause, he made a decision on how he should proceed. Since this was a big secret, even if Samuel Daly told it to him, it might not be true. It seemed that Kevin had to think of another way. Kevin Kyle asked again, "So, what is it that you want, Samuel Daly?" "What I want is very simple. I want money and power. I also want status." Speaking of this, Samuel Daly smiled again. "Kevin Kyle, you have all these things. As for whether you agree to give them to me or not, it depends on how important Karen Daly is in your mind. Before the afternoon comes, make a phone call to Karen Daly and tell her you're going to Beeford City to sort out some affairs." Kevin Kyle did not continue to question Samuel Daly, but gave him a task instead. "What the hell do you want to do?" Although he knew that Kevin Kyle did not dare to kill him, Samuel Daly's arrogance had weakened a lot after being treated like this. This kind of violent torture was worse than death. He was not a fool. He knew that he would suffer a lot, but he had to endure it when he had to. When he got everything he wanted, the Daly family would regain its former glory. At that time, no one would treat him like what they did today. "Don't you want money, power, and status?" Kevin Kyle looked at Samuel Daly as if he was looking at a clown. "I'll give you what you want, as long as you follow my instructions obediently." Money and power were not that important to Kevin Kyle, and they were not worth mentioning compared to Karen Daly. If Samuel Daly wanted these things, Kevin Kyle could give it to him. As for whether Samuel Daly could keep it, it depended on Samuel Daly's own ability. After Karen Daly had disappeared for a day, she went back to work. She received a large bouquet of roses. In the envious eyes of her colleagues, she returned to her office with roses in her arms. She knew that the flowers before were not sent by Kevin Kyle, and she knew that those nauseating words were not written by him, so she was not as repulsed as before. On the contrary, she wanted to see who was teasing her and what kind of terrible words this man could write. So, she simply opened it and looked at it. There was still a poem on the card, but the handwriting was more sonorous and forceful than before, more like the handwriting of a man. "Before you, the world was silent, and there was no loneliness. After you, the world was in a mess, and it was desolate. There was no signature." After reading this poem, Karen Daly's heart thumped in her chest, as if it might burst out of her body. Her delicate face grew redder, like the sunset glowing in the west. It made people feel intoxicated. This flower should not be sent by the person who had been teasing her. She could not think of anyone else. Could it be that these were really sent by Kevin Kyle? Kevin Kyle. How could this man touch her calm heart so easily? She had never had this kind of feeling in the past 3 years, but when she heard him talking, her heart seemed to no longer belong to her. Karen Daly. At the door of the office, Hector Cheng's voice suddenly came. Karen Daly hid the card behind her and smiled awkwardly. "Good morning, Director Cheng?" Hector Cheng looked at her and said with concern, "Are you all right? If you still feel uncomfortable, go home and rest for a few more days. Come back to work when you feel better." "Director Cheng, I'm fine." Karen Daly was a little confused. Since when was she not feeling well? Even if it was bad, it was still the old problems, and she didn't need any extra rest. Hector Cheng said, "Yesterday, you didn't come to work and I couldn't get through to your phone, so I called your father and asked him. He said you were sick and forgot to call in because you were in a hurry." Oh, I'm fine now, Karen replied. Her father had lied on her behalf, and her boss cared about her so much. She felt too embarrassed to show her face. That's good. Hector Cheng smiled and kept looking at the flowers on Karen Daly's desk. He wanted to say something else, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He simply nodded to Karen Daly and left. Karen Daly's mind was simple, and she didn't catch anything in Hector Cheng's eyes. After putting away the flowers, she began to work on her projects. Recently, she had been in charge of Kevin Kyle's projects. In fact, she also knew that Kevin Kyle did not really want the clothes designed by her. It was just that she looked like his deceased wife, so he found an excuse to get close to her. Since Kevin Kyle's order was not urgent, Karen Daly took the opportunity to design several sets of children's clothes. Little Karen had given her an amulet, and so Karen Daly also wanted to gift something to the little child. However, little Karen did not lack anything. So Karen Daly thought of designing and sewing a few sets of clothes personally for little Karen. Although it wasn't much, it was just a token of her care for little Karen. She was very busy at it, so much that she did not even take a sip of water during the process. Just as she was busy sketching with her head down, the mobile phone on the table suddenly rang. Seeing the phone number on the screen, Karen Daly raised her eyebrows unconsciously and smiled gently. Hello? What are you doing? Kevin Kyle's low and sexy voice came into her ears. I'm working, Karen replied. What do you want to eat at noon? I'll get someone to prepare it in advance. His question was so frank that it could not be refused. However, she had not agreed to have lunch with him. Chapter 247. When it was time for lunch, Karen Daly received a call from Kevin Kyle again, saying that he was waiting for her downstairs. He was already downstairs. Even if she didn't want to go, she couldn't refuse. What's more, she actually did want to have lunch with him. During the lunch break, there were a lot of people coming and going downstairs at the office, but Karen Daly still saw Kevin Kyle at first glance in the crowd. He was like a peacock amongst common birds. His appearance alone was extremely outstanding. No matter how simple he dressed, as long as it was him wearing it, the clothes would seem to be of a different taste. A few female colleagues around her were stunned when they saw Kevin Kyle in the building. They looked at him with eager eyes, as if ready to pounce on him. Suddenly, Karen Daly was a little unhappy, as if her belongings were being coveted by others. She quickened her pace and walked up to Kevin Kyle. Smiling, she said, Mr. Kyle, you've been waiting for a long time, haven't you? I have just arrived. He looked at her tenderly. He stretched out his long arms and pulled her into his embrace. He didn't care at all that countless eyes were staring at them. Kevin Kyle thought of the pain Karen Daly had suffered in the past 3 years. The fact that she not only had been robbed of her memories, her husband, and her child. He thought of how she was being controlled by her mother's murderer, Samuel Daly, drugged with medication and living like someone's plaything, and his heart began to ache. His blood boiling. Kevin, don't do this. Karen Daly gave him a push, but he held her even tighter. He was so strong that she was almost out of breath. Kevin Kyle held her in his arms and buried his head in her ear, calling her name in a low voice. Karen Daly, Karen Daly, over and over again. His voice was low and hoarse, as if he felt sorry for her, or as if there were many complicated emotions he could not express. For some reason, a pang of heartache welled up in Karen Daly's chest. She stopped refusing him and raised her arm around his waist. She wanted to tell him, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." However, she did not say anything, because she didn't understand what he was afraid of. Was he afraid of losing Karen Daly again? Karen Daly, he called her name again. Mr. Kyle, if you call me in such a tone, I may get angry. Karen Daly smiled, pretending to not notice his pain. Perhaps she didn't know what she liked about Kevin Kyle. Was it because he was so kind to her, or because she was envious of his love for his wife? Karen Daly, you may get angry at me, beat me, scold me. You can do whatever you want. As long as you don't leave me, I can protect you. Even if you wanted to get to heaven, I am willing to build a ladder for you. Kevin thought. I just want you to let go of me. There are so many people watching, Karen said indignantly. This man was really flirtatious. He was so handsome, and his voice was so pleasant, and he was so rich. The key was that he was also so considerate and gentle. As long as he was willing, would all the girls in the world be fascinated by him? It was really stressful to be with such a perfect man, who many people coveted. Was Mrs. Kyle very insecure when she was with him in the past? Or did she have to watch out for him every day? Otherwise, he would probably have been taken away by another woman. Let's go for lunch. Kevin Kyle also felt that he was overdoing it. He quietly calmed down and led her away. Okay, Karen Daly nodded. They were going to the same place for lunch, room 1808 at Baihe Restaurant. Karen felt it was particularly wasteful to book out such a good private room for just a casual meal. But when she thought of Kevin Kyle's status, she concluded he must not want to squeeze in the large dining halls with the lunchtime crowd. When they arrived at the room, Karen Daly realized that it would not be only the two of them today. There was another person there. Karen Daly had met this man before. He was little Karen's uncle. She could almost recall his name. It seemed to be George Ken or something. If little Karen's mother was also named Karen Daly, why would her brother be called George Ken? Karen Daly was a little confused. Miss Daly, we meet again. George Ken always looked casual. You're more beautiful than the last time we met. Mr. Ken, you are ever more handsome, Karen Daly said. Karen Daly did not dislike this person, though he always spoke in such a frivolous manner. George Ken smiled and said, comparing myself to Mr. Kyle, who do you think is more good-looking? Of course, it's Mr. Kyle. Karen Daly really wanted to answer this. But she wouldn't hurt George's self-esteem too much. So she cleverly answered, Well, what do you think, Mr. Ken? George Ken gave a look of surprise, said, Of course it's me. Is there any dispute? Karen Daly was rendered speechless. Well, confident people are true, the most handsome. Mr. Kyle glanced at them and felt a little jealous. When Karen Daly first met Kevin Kyle, she was polite and courteous to him, but she was so open when it came to George Ken. The blood ties between them were quite remarkable. Although Kevin had no blood relationship with Karen Daly, they were the closest to each other. Who could compare to him? The present Karen Daly was the only one who was not close to him. Oh, it seems that Mr. Kyle is jealous. Miss Daly, I'd better stay away from you. If you fall in love with me, I will be killed by Mr. Kyle, George Ken said. Now, George had been thinking of ways to help Karen Daly restore her memory every day. Kevin Kyle did not dare to do anything to him, so taking such a good opportunity to tease Mr. Kyle, who was always so cold and aloof, could also add some fun to his boring life. Uffed. Seeing George Ken's exaggerated words, Karen Daly couldn't help but burst out laughing. Her smile was brilliant and captivating. Brother-in-law, you see, Karen Daly is smiling. I'm better. The word brother-in-law suddenly hit Karen Daly's brainwaves, as if she had heard these words before. Her head was numb, and an image flashed in front of her. A brother-in-law, a brother, a pregnant woman with a big belly. Such a clear picture flashed away again. When she wanted to clear her mind was suddenly blank again. There was nothing left. These days, she had some strange images appear in her mind, but when she wanted to grasp at them, she couldn't recall anything. George Ken added, Miss Daly, I'm telling you Mr. Kyle only knows how to put on an act and pretend to be cold in front of others. In fact, he is a man who cares about his wife. When you have more contact with him, you will know how good he is. Karen Daly asked, Is he cold? In terms of Kevin Kyle's character, Karen Daly had never had such an impression of him being cold. He was a good man who was considerate of his wife, and there was no doubt. The problem was she able to fantasize about him? Chapter 248. Kevin Kyle glared at George Ken coldly, warning him to stop talking nonsense. The reason why he asked George Ken to come here for lunch was to let him say something that could help Karen Daly restore her memory. What he was saying now was all a mess. Under Kevin Kyle's gaze of warning, George Ken dared not act recklessly again. He coughed lightly and said, Brother-in-law, I heard that there are some new high-tech equipment installed at your Ravio hospital recently. Can I do a body checkup for free? Kevin Kyle scooped a bowl of soup for Karen Daly so she could have some soup first. Then he looked at George Ken and said, Go if you want. Miss Daly, you can come with me. Anyway, it's free. You should take advantage of it. Their actual purpose of the lunch was to trick Karen Daly into getting a full-body physical examination. They needed to check if her memory loss was caused by any brain injury. Karen Daly was about to shake her head in refusal, but Kevin Kyle, who was sitting beside her, spoke before she could. Sure, I too want to get a checkup. Let's go together. Karen Daly. George Ken said, Since we're all already together, shall we just go today? Matthew, get someone to prepare it in advance. We'll go after lunch. Kevin Kyle nodded. Karen Daly smiled apologetically and said, Sorry. I still have work to do in the afternoon. George said, Call your office and ask for sick leave. I'll get the doctor to issue you a note later. It'll be fine. Karen Daly said in surprise, Will that be okay? With Matthew here, nothing is impossible. George Ken said, and he looked at Kevin Kyle. Matthew, don't you think so? As a result, Karen Daly was indeed tricked into going to the hospital by the two men. The truth was, she didn't like going to hospitals. When she had been ill, she lay in the hospital for nearly a year, smelling the scent of medication every day. It was terrible. It was a dark time. Fortunately, her father was with her during that period of time. If she had been alone, she didn't know if she could have survived. Looking at Karen Daly being taken into the MRI room by the doctor, Kevin Kyle and George Ken looked at each other. George Ken said, "Don't worry too much." Till now, Kevin Kyle still did not know why Karen Daly had forgotten all the memories of the past. How could he not be worried? However, his worries were hidden in his heart, and he never told anyone. He kept everything to himself. If it weren't for Samuel Daly, Kevin Kyle would rather wish that Karen Daly lost all her memories completely. That way, she would not remember the terrible things that had happened 3 years ago, and she would not be hurt again. "Matthew, what are you going to do if the checkup confirms that Karen did not sustain any brain injuries?" George asked. "I will hunt that person down." Kevin Kyle spat these words after a long pause. That person was none other than Kevin's grandfather. And he was also the evil mastermind who killed his wife. He really did not want to call that person Grandpa now. And he had to find out the root cause of Karen Daly's memory loss as soon as possible, and let her return to his side. George Ken added, "What if he doesn't admit it and doesn't tell you anything? What can you do? What should he do?" For a moment, Kevin Kyle really couldn't think of what he could do to Grandpa Kyle. If that person was not his grandfather, Kevin would have taken action a long time ago. But there was no if. That person was, indeed, his grandfather, a person who shared such close blood ties with him. Grandpa Kyle had attacked Karen Daly, so the secret mentioned by Samuel Daly must be the reason for all of this. But what on earth was that secret? Once the secret was revealed, who would be involved and who would be hurt? Was it Kevin? Was it Mia? Or was it their parents? Kevin Kyle could only guess. Or was there something to be gained by someone else? Thinking of this, Kevin Kyle thought of Neil Brown. It seemed that it was time to talk to him. George Ken was a psychology expert. Usually, he couldn't see through what Kevin Kyle was thinking, but he could always pry into Karen Daly's mind. The person behind everything was Kevin Kyle's grandfather. He was indeed not so simple to deal with. It was understandable that Kevin Kyle couldn't give George Ken a good answer. He immediately changed the topic. "Didn't we ask Mia and Faye to come over? Why haven't they arrived yet? Where have they been slacking off? Who is speaking ill of us?" Mia's crisp voice interrupted their conversation. They looked back and saw Mia Kyle, who was wearing a cap and sunglasses, and Faye Reed, who was walking behind her. George Ken said quickly, "Well, speak of the devil. My two beautiful women, I have missed you too much. That's why I was talking about you." Mia Kyle said, "Never speak ill of people behind their backs. Otherwise, there will be ghosts knocking on your door at night." Mia is right. "Mr. Ken, be careful. A female ghost will knock on your door at night," Faye Reed chipped in playfully. Although she had sustained burns all over her body, and her face was almost disfigured by the fire, her outgoing and brisk personality had not changed. After many years, it was still the same Faye Reed. "I don't mind a female ghost. I happen to be short of a companion. That way, I can save a lot of trouble." George Ken was also always so frivolous. They were making a ruckus. Only Kevin Kyle remained silent. It seemed as if they didn't exist at all. He kept his eyes on the MRI room, and his mind was all on Karen Daly. He had instructed his men to change the drugs that Samuel Daly was giving Karen Daly into vitamins. Karen Daly was now off the drugs. Whether she could move away from the drug addiction was what he was most worried about at present. Mia Kyle yawned and asked, "Where's my sister-in-law?" Last night, Mia Kyle had attended a movie premiere. After that, she went to socialize at a dinner party. She was busy till midnight and only went back to her apartment to rest late at night. Mia would not normally be awake at this hour, given her late night the night before. She was yawning and tearing out of sleepiness. If it weren't for the fact that she was supposed to go shopping with Karen Daly, she would get out of bed even under the threat of getting beaten up. George Ken said, "There are two super handsome men in front of you, but you turn a blind eye to them." "It's very heartrending," Faye Reed said. "We are all taken. No matter how handsome you are just another man. There is only one purpose for us here, that is to take Karen Daly shopping with us." Mia Kyle nodded in agreement with Faye Reed. "I only like my Neil Brown. Other men, except my brother, are not even attractive in my eyes." George Ken made a very exaggerated expression of injury. "If you two beautiful women don't want me, then I have to go to our most precious little Karen for love," Mia Kyle said. Little Karen has her new big brother recently. She doesn't want her dad anymore. She wouldn't have the time to talk to you, uncle. George Ken shrugged his shoulders helplessly and pretended to be sad. Well, just give me a hard beating. After all, I'm still single with nobody to love. Chapter 249. Faye Reed said, with your appearance and knowledge, there must be a bunch of girls who want to pursue you. There would be all kinds of girls. It's just that you are too picky. It's not true. George Ken wiped away his fake tears and sighed. I shouldn't have gotten to know Matthew. Wherever he is, no woman would see me. Mia Kyle nodded hard to show her agreement. Master Ken, you've finally spoken the truth. With my brother around, there would be nothing left for other men. Upon hearing Mia Kyle's words, George Ken was about to cry. Please think about my feelings, okay? No matter how he wailed, no one comforted him. I am done. Have you all done it already? Karen Daly came out of the examination room and saw so many people around. She was surprised and said, Hey, Miss Kyle, Miss Reed, you all are here. Mia Kyle said, Yeah, what a coincidence. Have you got anything to do this afternoon? How about going shopping with us, Miss Daly? What is up with these Miss Daly, Miss Reed, Miss Kyle? Faye Reed shouted discontentedly, My name is Faye, and her name is Maya. If you continue to call us Miss, I'll beat you up. Karen Daly was nervous. These people were all so hospitable to her. They must be the previous Corinne Daly's friends. So when they saw her, they felt as if they had seen an old friend from many years ago. They were so kind and concerned about her, which warmed her heart. Kevin Kyle, who had been silent for a long time and had been looking at Karen Daly, walked up to her and pushed the wisps of hair that fell over her forehead behind her ear. He said softly, Go shopping with them. I'll tell you when I get the results. Okay. Karen Daly nodded and smiled gently. You have your work too. But don't get too tired. After saying these words, Karen Daly turned around and saw that everyone was staring at her. In an instant, her face was flushed with embarrassment. They were not that close to Kevin Kyle, were they? Why did he do such an intimate thing to her in front of so many people? She had almost forgotten that there were other people around her. Karen Daly, let's go. Faye Reed helped Karen Daly out of the predicament in time. She grabbed her and turned to leave the place. Mia Kyle followed them closely. She turned back and said to the two big men who were watching them leave, You two go play on your own. Don't worry about us. I will take good care of my future sister-in-law. Watching them walk away, Kevin Kyle then turned away and walked with George Ken to retrieve the physical examination report for Karen. Both Mia Kyle and Faye Reed were fun people. Karen Daly's mood was uplifted by their mere presence. When she listened to them talking on their way out, her smile was ever present. The two of them seemed as if they were guarding a toy that could break at any time. One of them walked on Karen Daly's left while the other walked her right. If the passers-by got anywhere closer to her, the two ladies flanking Karen would make sure that they were chased away. Karen Daly found it funny. People who don't know us would think you're going to kidnap me somewhere. She joked. Mia Kyle said, We are here to protect you. If we meet someone who harms you, my brother would kill me when we return. Karen Daly couldn't remember, but when she was pregnant with little Karen, she had been kidnapped before. Mia Kyle and Faye Reed remembered this clearly, especially when she disappeared 3 years ago. It was hard for her to have returned. Everyone wanted to protect her this time. Karen Daly shook her head helplessly. On the contrary, a trace of happiness rose in her heart. In the past 3 years, she didn't have a single friend, but suddenly she had so many friends who cared about her. It felt very good. Apart from feeling good, Karen Daly also felt inexplicably a little disappointed. They are good to me, just like Kevin Kyle likes me, she thought. Because all of them regarded her as the Karen Daly who had passed away. Karen, Mia, let's go have hot pot after shopping, Faye Reed suggested. In the past, she and Karen Daly would eat hot pot together frequently. On a hot day, drinking the steaming hot soup, it could be quite exhilarating. Mia Kyle said, I've been preparing for a new movie recently. I can't have too many high-calorie meals, but I can just sit with you. Karen Daly hadn't had hot pot for a long time, because her father always said that eating hot pot was not good for her health, so she could only abstain from doing so. As Faye Reed spoke of hot pot, Karen felt her tummy grumble. So, she agreed without hesitation. Okay, when we're done shopping, we can have hot pot together. They went to the largest shopping mall in Chatterton Town. Kevin Kyle and Karen Daly went there shopping for the first time. Karen Daly didn't want to buy anything at first, but when she walked into the mall and saw clothing for little girls, she was deeply tempted. She couldn't help thinking of little Karen. When she saw the dresses, she would think of how good little Karen would look in them. When she saw some toys, she wondered if little Karen would like these toys. In short, everything was suitable for a child of little Karen's age. Karen Daly wanted to buy them and give them to her. However, she understood too well that little Karen did not need these things at all, so she had to suppress her impulse to shop. Mia Kyle looked at Karen Daly. It was as if it was the Karen from a few years ago. Back then, she and Karen Daly had gone shopping together, and Karen still had her big pregnant belly. She shopped at the baby supplies store fervently. Even though her family had already prepared all these baby supplies for her, she still bought a lot of them. Faye Reed was a fashion designer. Every time she went shopping and looked at clothes, she couldn't help but having some professional opinion on them. There were not many clothes that she liked. She would not buy anything even if she shopped around. Teach. The clothes of the 2 brands you like are on the 5th floor. Why don't we go up and have a look? Faye Reed called Karen Daly that way. It was just like how she used to call her. Okay, Karen Daly answered instinctively. She didn't even notice that Faye Reed was supposed to be a stranger to her. How could she know what brand of clothes she liked? Just as the 3 of them were about to go upstairs, a branded scarf shop attracted Karen Daly's attention. She stood still and looked at the scarf shop quietly. In a trance, she saw a young and handsome man and a beautiful woman appearing in the empty store. The man was wearing a silver gray suit and a pair of glasses with golden frames. He looked at the woman tenderly. Under his gentle gaze, the woman blushed and helped the man put on the scarf. Then she plucked up the courage to kiss the man surreptitiously on the corner of his mouth. Do you like it? Yes. There seemed to be 2 familiar voices ringing in Karen Daly's ears, and she even saw the man's face clearly. It was Kevin Kyle. Chapter 250. How could this be? How could she see herself getting so close to Kevin Kyle? Karen Daly didn't understand, but her heart suddenly ached. It hurt so much that she broke out in cold sweat as if she had missed something very important, but she couldn't recall what it was. What was very important to her? Karen Daly didn't even know, and her mind suddenly went blank. Sister-in-law, what's wrong with you? Teach, don't scare us. Looking at Karen Daly, who was stunned and breaking out in a cold sweat, Mia Kyle and Faye Reed reached out to hold her almost at the same time. Mia Kyle and Faye Reed were speaking to her anxiously, but Karen Daly couldn't hear anything, as if she had suddenly stepped into another dimension. Everything around turned white, and her surroundings were empty. There was no one around, and she seemed to be floating in the air. She could not move up nor down. She was like a bird without legs. She could only fly around but never land. She didn't know how much time had passed. When she felt that she was about to forget this world entirely, there was finally a voice coming into her ears. The white around her also disappeared, and the present scarf store reappeared before her. She was surrounded by Faye Reed and Mia Kyle. Karen, what's wrong with you? Sister-in-law. I'd better call my brother. Faye Reed's and Mia Kyle's caring eyes were so warm that it made Karen Daly want to shed tears, but she restrained herself. She quietly took a deep breath and stopped Mia Kyle from taking out her mobile phone. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. You really scared me just now. Karen Daly did not cry, but Faye Reed, who had always been so strong and crude, suddenly started crying and hugging Karen Daly. Teach. Don't scare us like that anymore. This feeling of retrieving something lost, getting it back, but always feeling like it could disappear at any time was not a good feeling. Faye Reed was so upset that she couldn't keep up her strong facade anymore, and she too began to cry in desperation. Faye. Karen Daly patted her on the back. Although her heart was tightly clenched by Faye Reed's tears, she still smiled gently. If you continue to cry, all the people in the mall will stare at you. Faye Reed let go of Karen Daly and wiped her tears. Let them surround and watch. It's not like they haven't seen a woman cry. Then, she cried and laughed at the same time. BHO, you know how worried I am? Karen Daly said, in the future, I won't let you worry about me anymore. Regardless of whether they regarded her as Karen Daly's substitute, Karen Daly would treat them as her friends and care for them sincerely. Because of this episode, the 3 of them were no longer in the mood to go shopping anymore. They went to the hot pot restaurant recommended by Faye Reed for an early dinner. After dinner, Mia Kyle and Faye Reed sent Karen Daly home together and ensured that she was safe before they left. Mia Kyle also called her brother in time to report the situation. She also told Kevin Kyle about Karen Daly's abnormal behavior earlier that day. Hanging up the phone, Mia Kyle then dialed Neil Brown's number. She had been so busy these days that she didn't have time to harass him. She had to pester him today. But when she called him, he didn't even get someone to deal with her. Instead, he hung up the phone immediately. looking at the blank mobile phone screen. Mia Kyle jumped up in anger. For a moment, she forgot that she was still sitting in the car. She hit the roof of the car, which made her scream in pain. Jackie Ball, who was driving, looked at her from the rearview mirror and asked worriedly, "Polaris, did you hit anything?" "My head is going to explode." "Do you think I hit anything?" "How do you drive?" Because of the pain in her head, Mia Kyle roared angrily and blamed Jackie Ball's driving instead. It wasn't the first time, and Jackie Ball had gotten used to her temper. Her mouth was vicious. In fact, she treated these people who followed her closely like how she treated her own family members. Mia Kyle rubbed her head, wincing in pain, and the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The B-starred, Neil Brown, she had not been looking for him for a few days. He dared to hang up her phone. Damn it. After thinking for a while, Mia Kyle asked, "Where can we buy explosives in Chatterton Town?" Hanging up her phone, wasn't he? Mia thought furiously. He ignored her, didn't he? Today, she was going to blow up his old nest and see how arrogant he was. She wanted to see if he could still be so aloof. Explosives are against the law. It's not easy to buy them, Jackie Ball explained honestly. If I can't buy the explosives, I'll buy 2 barrels of gasoline, Mia exclaimed. Since she couldn't blow up Neil Brown's old nest, she will burn it up instead. It would have the same effect. Jackie Ball said, "Polaris, Captain Brown didn't pick up your call, did he?" Hearing this and seeing Jackie Ball's sympathetic eyes from the rearview mirror, Mia Kyle was in a worse mood. She was going to explode with anger. "Jackie Ball, do you know how to speak in human language?" "What do you mean? Does he dare not answer my call?" Although it was indeed a fact that Neil Brown didn't answer her phone call, everyone already knew the truth. Was it necessary to say it to her face? Jackie Ball kept his mouth shut and no longer dared to say a word to provoke her. If he continued to provoke her, her fury would be unfathomable. After being silent for a while, Mia Kyle said, "Head to the military base." Jackie Ball had no choice but to turn around and head for the direction of the Chatterton Town military base. After all, this young lady was so sure she wanted that man. Karen Daly's test results came out soon. There was no trauma sustained by her brain. Kevin Kyle and George Ken ruled out the possibility that Karen Daly's brain suffered from memory loss due to brain injury. They would now focus their investigation on medication and mental stimulation and let the experts that they had hired to figure out a cure. As for Karen Daly, after Kevin Kyle had kidnapped Samuel Daly, he had instructed his men to replace the medication that Samuel Daly was giving to Karen Daly with common vitamins. Vitamins tablets would not cause any harm to the body, but it would be a torture for Karen Daly, who had long been addicted to the previous drug. Her father said that he would go to Beaufort City to run some errands. It might take a few days for him before he would be back, leaving her alone at home. She stayed at home alone and didn't even have a person to talk to. The house, with 2 bedrooms, was hauntingly empty. It made her feel very uncomfortable. She sat in a daze for a while, and then began to design clothes for little Karen again. After she finished the designs, she chose some fabric so that the clothes could be completed quickly. That way, she could make it in time for Children's Day to send these gifts to little Karen. But only a while after she started drawing, Karen Daly yawned. She had no strength and felt extremely demotivated. She was also very anxious, as if she wanted to pick a fight with someone. She threw aside the pen in her hand, got up, and washed her face in the bathroom, hoping to refresh herself.